Hey everybody, welcome back to the LuckyDog podcast. This is your host, Elias. Today we are discussing Trainspotting, the 1996 British black comedy drama film directed by Danny Boyle. This is Danny Boyle's second directorial debut following the movie Shallow Grave. This movie was released in late February of 1996, based on the novel of the same name by Irving Welsh. Screenplay by John Hodge, starring Ewan McGregor, Ewan Brimmer, Johnny Lee Miller, Kevin McKidd, Robert Carlyle, and Kelly MacDonald. The cinematography is by Brian Tufano and edited by Mashiro Hakaribo. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. Going at about 93 minutes at a budget of roughly 1.3 million euros, which I think's probably closer to 2 to 3 million in US at this time, or during that. Trainspotting was a movie I was completely under the radar. I was in 1996. I guess I was only about 2 or 3 at that time, and so I was a baby. I was not entranced in the 90s culture like a lot of people were. If you were a little bit older at that time, or above maybe preteen to teenager age, this movie is really going to hit that sector. It's kind of that same vibe as like Fight Club in a way. The gang of guys, the group of guys all coming together to kind of do some sort of mishaps in a way. Let me pull up the synopsis. Here's the synopsis for Trainspotting. Renton, deeply immersed in Edinburgh's drug scene, tries to clean up and get out despite the allure of drugs and his influence of friends. This movie had a lot of praise coming behind it. I wasn't really sure exactly why. I know a little bit about Danny Boyle and his style. His cinematography is very unique. Storytelling as well. Some of my favorite work with Danny Boyle, with regards to Danny Boyle, is movies like 28 Weeks Later, Slumdog Millionaire, movies that are uniquely different, that aren't really based on other properties, maybe based on books, but there are completely new stories in the way that he shows them and in the way that they're told. So, Trainspotting as a whole definitely was created on a much smaller budget than some of Danny Boyle's newer movies. I decided to go back and rewatch Trainspotting and Trainspotting 2. However, this review will just be covering Trainspotting. However, before we go into any spoilers, I would recommend watching the first and second Trainspotting if, from a cinematography, filmmaking standpoint, you're interested at all. If you like Ewan McGregor, Ewan Brimmer, Johnny Lee Miller, if you like Danny Boyle, I think that if you like any of these actors or people behind the scenes, you are going to be pleased with this movie. Trainspotting 1996 is much more of, I'd say, a bleaker film than the follow-up T2. However, T2, that's what Trainspotting 2 is being called, T2 Trainspotting. I'm not really sure why they decided to do that, but Trainspotting is Trainspotting in 96 is showing you the story in the lives of these characters. T2 is the follow-up and repercussions of what happens within Trainspotting 1. So, with saying that, I had heard through the grapevine that these were really cinematic movies, and they kind of touched on a a culture that's not always shown. Places like Edinburgh, and the type of cinematography and filmmaking that is shown with Danny Boyle having, this is Danny Boyle's second directorial debut on the big screen, is extremely impressive, and ambitious, honestly. So the pros of this movie obviously come from the cinematography. I've been talking about that probably the entire time. The colors, the editing, the direction, the acting, and the chemistry between the characters feels very lively and real and organic. The cons for this movie, for me personally, and I know that there's a lot of love for this movie, so I want to tread lightly with all the Trainspotting fans, but the cons for me personally, I didn't have subtitles on, and so it was extremely difficult at times for me to understand what they were saying, because they have this really thick Edinburgh accent that really shines throughout most of the movie. So if you're thinking about watching this movie, I would absolutely get subtitles or captions handy. Another part about this movie that I found really interesting was the fact that these people feel so real, to the point where they're three-dimensional people, but it also makes it feel hard to feel, I guess, sympathy for these people, because a lot of the times it feels like they're sort of putting themselves, I guess, in these situations. They're the ones doing the drugs, they're the ones making the bad decisions. So at the end of the day, anything that comes back on them, you see that it's kind of their own undoing. And so let me see, I had information regarding Trainspotting, the title. The title comes from a particular scene in the book where the main character, Mark Renton, played by Ian McGregor, meets an old drunk in a disused train station. This is all from Wikipedia. Who turns out to be his friend's estranged father. The old man asks Renton and Bigby, who's the man's son if they are train spotting? So Trainspotting, to me, what it seems like is the act or use of using drugs as escapism, and spotting the trains is relatively what happens after you get in the state of mind. That's about all you're going to be doing. So on top of all of that, I think the sets, I think the acting, I think the practical effects of this movie are very minimal for such a small budget, but it works so real to the griminess of Edinburgh. So let's jump into the spoiler section real quick of Trainspotting. I thought almost immediately as this movie started, they showed a couple of the characters getting high on heroin. Sorry, I don't know the exact terminology for all this, because I'm not entranced in the drug culture like they are. So if my lingo's a little bit off, sorry about that. But they're getting high in this old train station of some sort, and you can just tell that the actors, they look like they're actually high, like they're having these like reactions, like they don't have control of their muscle movements. They're almost like kissing each other when they're feeling each other's muscles and stuff like that. It's just weird, and at first, and it's a little bit jarring. I was like, what the fuck am I watching? And should I be watching this on a plane? So I was on my way to LA watching all this. I was like, oh, I don't know about all this. I love the shades of colors when he's throwing up. This movie is really disgusting. There's a lot of poop and vomit and a lot of just things coming out of people's bodies and people going into other things, toilets and shit like that. I was just like, this is a gross ass movie, and they really want to show the griminess of it, despite it being It's a gross movie technically, but it's cinematically very visually stunning to look at. Um, let me see. So yeah, they're trying to be, I guess, socially respectable drug addicts, and they're literally swimming in shit. And I was taken completely back when he jumps in this fucking toilet and starts literally swimming in the shit. I was like, this is insane. First of all, the visuals are very cool to watch him to go into the toilet and, you know, start swimming, literally swimming in the shit. I was just like, this is crazy. But from a visual standpoint, I really appreciated it because it kind of gave you this juxtaposition of how nasty it was versus how beautiful the scene was. I was trying to figure out, did he really fall? My guess is he didn't really fall in the toilet, but later we see him and he's completely soaked. So maybe we're following an unreliable narrator at this point. I realized that this movie is very stuck in the 90s, just from the standpoint of maybe the diversity wasn't at its highest in the filmmaking back then, and maybe it could be because of where it's located in Edinburgh. I'm not really sure what it's like over there. But it definitely feels like this movie is rooted in the 90s. It's definitely way before all of the internet stuff starts to take hype. It's before people started to have things to complain. People started complaining about more than just like consumerism or capitalism type stuff. Like all the main characters were really worrying about was, you know, dicking around in the park, shooting pellet gun or BB guns at dogs to make them attack their owners and shit like that. It was, you know, just dumb shit. And we also see other characters such as what was his name? Brimmer. Ewan Brimmer is Spud. Each one of these characters have some sort of I want to say problem or hump or speed bump in their own personal lives that they are all trying to get over. You know, it's all very much it's not quite a coming of age story. It's kind of a coming of age meets a character study of these guys. And they are literally in complete shit. One of them, Spud, gets absolutely way too high or ripped before his interview. And that's a pretty hilarious scene, but it's also sad because you know this guy's not going to get it. Like when he's talking about that, he's just rambling on the entire time for his interview. It's like, holy shit, shut up. You know, it's clear he's not going to get this shit. And other things that really root this in the 90s, McGregor has that small shirt in the club. But by the way, from what I heard, this is one of the first movies that everyone was talking about Ewan McGregor in, which is quite impressive. I didn't realize he just started right off the bone. Amazing. I know that he's pretty diverse in the in what he chooses to star in. But I mean, let me see what he was in before this. TV. He was in Being Human, Shallow Grave. Okay, so he was in Shallow Grave with Danny Boyle on his first movie, and then he joined him again for Trainspotting. So this was only like his second or third major movie. Let me see. Trainspotting, Blue Juice. I'm not sure if Blue Juice was on the big screen or not. So, yeah, I'm very surprised about Ian McGregor with how good he was. I mean, this was probably his biggest role, Trainspotting, until he was back in, let me see anything. Yeah, he was in Phantom Menace 3 years later. And then right after that, he followed up in Moulin Rouge, and then Attack of the Clones and Black Hawk Down the following years after those. So yeah, he started to only become a bigger and bigger movie star as he was going, and obviously going into the Star Wars franchise made him much more well known, and he started doing some sci-fi with like movies like The Island, and so he's got a very diverse filmography, and I really like Ewan McGregor. Loved him in Doctor Sleep most recently. Let me see what else we got. So let me see. Spud is fucking up. Basically, a lot of the women in this movie are kind of not quite pushed to the side. I wouldn't say that they're just like front runners in what's going on in the lives of these guys. They do happen to, all of the guys really do have a girlfriend or someone they are calling theirs, and you can see what's happening with Spud. Spud literally shits the bed and then continues to throw it on his girlfriend's parents during breakfast. I was like, God dang, this is ridiculous. I didn't even know what to think about this, because it just seemed so ridiculous on the face of it. No one seemed like they were acting like they would normally act. Like, he's like, let me take care of my shit, and she's like, these are my sheets, and he's like, but it's my shit, and it's like, but these are my sheets, and it's like the shit goes everywhere. So of course the deterioration of the majority of their girlfriends and their relationships begins to happen throughout the movie. And we also find out Ian McGregor slept with an underage student. I think she was like 15 at the time, and she's supposed to be played by, let me see, Kelly MacDonald, and plays Diane. I know Kelly MacDonald not personally, but I know her best well from No Country for Old Men, and also being the love interest in Boardwalk Empire for Steve Buscemi. And so I've really liked Kelly MacDonald, or MacDonald, or however you pronounce it, but I thought she was really good in this. She doesn't seem to have aged a day. I couldn't tell she was 15, which is kind of scary, honestly. She looks the same age as she does in that movie as she does in many movies after, even 10, 15 years later. So she's looking great. Let's see. I was like, the entire time this is going on, all these guys are just coming back to this unused train station, coming back, getting high on heroin, and just completely being irresponsible. There's a baby rolling around the entire first 20, 30 minutes of the movie, and I'm like, whose baby is this? And I think Renton is also saying the same thing. He didn't know whose it was either, until one day they come back, and I think it was Sick Boy's girlfriend. I think her name was Allison. She is absolutely losing her shit, and she is, upset. We don't know what's going on. We turn around and, of course, go into the baby's crib very slowly with the camera pulling, and the baby suffocated, or died in some sort of manner because, just negligence. And that was not a scene I was ready to see, just after all these, lights and colors and drugs and all that. It's somewhat of a glorification of a lot of this. I had heard scrutiny that, this movie makes drugs look like too much fun or something like that. But when scenes like this come on, heavy real life scenes come on, traumatic scenes like this, I'm like, oh my gosh, it completely changes the narrative of what kind of story we're watching and the people that we're following. We aren't just going on this band of carefree living with these guys. There's actually repercussions and stakes to what's happening to the people that are around them and the people they're affecting, specifically Sick Boy's baby. And it's pretty upsetting to watch that scene, and it's pretty powerful. I probably should have prefaced that in the spoiler-free section to say, if you have anything, regarding kids that, you're a little highly sensitive towards, maybe you shouldn't watch this movie, because if you had any semblance of I wouldn't even want to. I wouldn't even want to think about someone that's actually gone through this having to watch this, because watching this not having a kid versus watching it having a kid versus watching it having a kid in the child's passed on but at a young age, I couldn't imagine. Absolutely couldn't imagine. One of the worst things and horrifying things, you have to you, you think about or that they bring to mind. And I think this scene is probably one of the big ones that come out when remembering this movie and the repercussions of, train spotting, aka doing drugs. The one of the most sad things that they do after that I think is very important is that I want to say the mother's name was Allison. Allison decides, or Renton decides, that the best thing for her is to go get high. And so instead of taking care of all of that, and they walk into the next room and they immediately go to get high. It's like, oh, did you not learn anything from this? It's like the addiction is so strong that no matter what's going on in your life, that's the number one priority. And this movie really shows, the extreme effects of addiction. So it was very traumatizing in real life when it came to that. I think there was I don't remember who goes to court, but there's something weird with the judge's hair. I'm trying to remember what was going on. I don't have the movie in front of me right now. Okay, so we find out that I don't think Renton's parents are that great. I think they kind of leave him to fraught for himself. Yeah, I mixed feelings on the way that Renton is raised and the way that his folks approach him and help him. And I was a little bit weary about how old is this guy. So he's old enough for it to be wrong to have sex with Kelly MacDonald's character, but he's not quite old enough to be like a grown man. So I'm thinking somewhere between 18 and 25. Let me see. Okay, so I loved the effects of him falling into the carpet as he OD'd. It's like the camera gets stuck in between the carpet where Renton feels that he is, and the carpet stays within the frame of the film the entire time until he comes out of that OD'd state. And that entire cross editing section is like, it makes you think that he's like, I think the drug dealer says something like, oh, we got to call a taxi. And so when you think that, he's like, oh, he's going to call an ambulance, because it immediately cuts to an ambulance. And that ambulance goes right by the drug house, and they literally did call a taxi that comes up not 10 seconds behind it. And the weird thing is, it feels like this drug dealer has called this taxi driver before, with giving Renton the money in the pocket, and the way they put Renton in the back of the car, and the way they deliver him. The taxi driver delivers him at the hospital, and then he just takes the money straight from Renton, really, without seeing if he's okay or not. It just feels all too fluent, like they've done this before. But when he comes back to life, or when he comes out of the OD'd state, the carpet comes, it moves away from the surface of the screen, and I thought that was a really cool effect. I think there's a couple scenes in Breaking Bad of people getting high on drugs, meth and heroin and whatever else, and a lot of those scenes do feel like they are based back in Trainspotting. Let's see. I noticed that his folks sort of baby him. I didn't really understand the age disparity. I was very confused. Was this guy supposed to be in college or high school, or what's going on? And I can definitely tell his parents, want him to get clean and maybe have possibly tried to get him get clean before. But it does feel like they just stick him in his old room with all the trains on the wall, by the way. Very cool. I just, I wasn't quite sure what to think about his folks. And then there's this whole scene, I think, in the middle. It's kind of like the choose life thing. And what I think is the dance music that starts to happen while he's trying to recover from the heroin, just basically sweat it out, is intense, and it's this craziness. All the stuff is going up. It's like ding 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 ding, and he starts hearing Spud. When sorry, back 20-30 minutes before in the movie, him and Spud had gotten in trouble for, I think, stealing some stuff, and running from cops and whatnot. They didn't really give a shit. They were doing all these hijinks and pranks. That's where the judge's hair was bad, I think, and that's what brought Ian McGregor back to his folks' place. And so, sorry, it's been a couple days since I've seen it, and I've seen a bunch of movies since then, so I'm just kind of replaying in my head. But when the dance music is starting to happen, when Renton is starting to try to excrete all of the heroin from his body, it's just like this dance music, and it kind of fades into the clanging of Spud on top of his wardrobe, and it's supposed to be this culmination of the drugs and the guilt and the crawling baby on the ceiling and the head turning. I was like, what is going on? It made me think that the marketing and the name and just all of this stuff for this movie feels completely wrong, because I was like, this is what this movie's about. This movie is about a very interesting concept of addiction, but combined it with amazing visuals and stellar acting and a hell of a director. And you've got a great cocktail right there. That's it's bound to be an interesting mix, and given the fact that it's relatively an original idea or just based off a book, and there aren't too many movies that I could compare this to, maybe it's like, for me, it felt like a mix of a little bit of Clockwork Orange versus a mix of Fight Club, and it kind of combines a little bit of the two together. But I really was blown away by this sequence specifically, and then the craziness with the game show, and his buddy on Spud sitting on top of the wardrobe, and the baby's head's going crazy. It's just intense. And then I think the soundtrack throughout this entire movie is stellar. I just want to get the Trainspotting soundtrack 1 and 2 on vinyl. I think it sounds dope. But yeah. So at the very end, we find out Renton, he's just an absolute degenerate. He ends up, going with Bagley and Spud and Sick Boy, and they are all about to do this, quick deal. And the deal is for 20 grand, and each one of them are going to get roughly 4 to 5 grand. And so they're going through this whole deal, and, Mark Renton, Ewan McGregor's character, is, thinking whether or not he should steal the money. And Spud is the one guy that was really great friends with him at the time. The entire movie, I will have to say, Robert Carlyle's character is an absolute crazy man. Bigby literally will pull a knife on anybody for anything. I've never seen somebody pull a knife so fast. If this guy was in America or in the States, he'd probably be shooting people. But this guy, I guess because he's in Europe, I assume that knife is of his choice, but this guy is insane. And so watching him in this was just like, holy fuck. This character. Let me see. So yeah, Robert Carlyle, you don't want to get on his bad side. So Ewan McGregor deciding to steal the 20 grand minus the 4 grand he gave the Spud, was probably not a great idea, but that also means he cannot go back to see this guy because this guy wants to take him out. So Kevin McKidd plays Tommy, and this is one of the main characters sort of at the beginning that you see getting high. We find out that he was first given heroin by Renton's character. Renton really did he didn't supply, but he did push a lot of them to do some of these drugs in a way, and they kind of blame him in a way for the things that have happened to him. I think they said that Tommy had a heart attack, but he also was suffering from HIV/AIDS, and so they are touching a little bit on, the needle and drug epidemic and STDs and stuff like that during the 90s to make it, I guess, a little bit more relevant to the time. But I mean, regardless of the time, if you're sharing needles, you gotta worry about that shit. And so yeah, at the very end, Renton walks out to the credits discussing what he just did, leaving the money for Spud. Obviously, given that Spud's a drug addict, we can probably guess what's going to happen. But Sick Boy is left high and dry. Tommy's passed away, and Begbie is losing his absolute shit at the very end of that movie, in the hotel, just searching for everything. But obviously he's just pissed, and so for this movie to end on that bold of a statement, I was just like, holy shit, like this is quite an ending for our main character. The main drug addict has decided to fuck over all of his friends minus one and just bounce. And so I thought it was a very bold ending, and I actually did like the ending. I was kind of surprised. I think I was more geared to the second half of this movie than I was the first, mostly because I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. And having no knowledge of the marketing and materials and what the hell Trainspotting was, I just didn't know what to expect. So as the movie formed into more of the character study that it became of these guys and these degenerates, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a little bit more. So, didn't get much from James Cosmo, Mr. Renton, and Mrs. Renton. They're in a few select scenes with Ian McGregor. Obviously, James Cosmo is from Game of Thrones early seasons. But yeah, I was very impressed with Trainspotting, given the earliness of Danny Boyle's career, and of course these fine actors. Even Brimmer, we've seen him in most recently Wonder Woman. We've seen Johnny Lee Miller, and I haven't seen him in too much actually. He's more of a, looks like elementary CBS, Dracula 2000, Mindhunters. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Johnny Lee Miller as much. And Kevin McKidd, I don't know if I know too much about him. He's Brave, Kingdom of Heaven, Dog Soldiers. Yeah, I'm not terribly sure about all these. And Robert Carlyle, this guy's on another one. He goes the full Monty. The World Is Not Enough. Yeah, he's been in Once Upon a Time. Yeah, he's been in some interesting stuff. But overall, Trainspotting, I absolutely would recommend this movie. It holds up in a way that I was not expecting. T2, I will say, is a great follow-up to Trainspotting 1, with the exception of the bleakness. I want to say that Trainspotting 1 has a pacing and a slight overtone of just griminess to it that Trainspotting 2 doesn't have. Trainspotting 2 definitely feels like it's a more polished up Edinburgh. Things have changed. Things look a little bit better. It doesn't quite look like Detroit or something like that. But T2 is definitely a recommend if you were interested in Trainspotting. I'll try to do a quick follow-up review for T2 so y'all have reviews for both. Thank you for watching LuckyDog Podcast. Check out everything you need to know in the show notes. I appreciate you listening to the LuckyDog Podcast, watching, listening, supporting. 5 stars. You know what to do. Keep us on iTunes. Keep us high up in the ratings. Email, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, Discord. Comments, questions, concerns. Everything you need to know is in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the LuckyDog Podcast. Check out Trainspotting 2 review coming down the tube very soon as well. Thank you for listening and take it easy.